Cornell Douglas Macgregor. How's everything in the United States?
Peachy.
What does that mean?
Well, it means everything is good, which I'm being fastidious, as we say, or I'm not too serious.
Let's start up with this. Last time we spoke, we talked about the conflict between NATO proxy war, the Ukraine, Russia, and so forth. Let's start off where we left. There's some information figuring going around that some of the weapons designated to be sent to the Ukraine from both US and, I guess, from Great Britain and other recent West is being redirected to go to Israel. Let's start off with that. What's your opinion about that?
Well, you understand, I'm sure your viewers are aware that we have sent almost all of our war stocks and many weapon systems and ammunition to Ukraine, with the result that we don't have a great deal left. And it was decided that given Israel's precarious situation right now, and it is precarious, by the way, that they needed whatever 155mm ammunition we had, plus other types of ammo. I think it also reflects something else. The war in Ukraine is lost. It was lost a long time ago. The Russians are sitting on virtually all the territory that is Russian historically, except for Kharkov and Odessa, which they will undoubtedly move to take at some point in the near future. But for the moment, they're not advancing very quickly to the west, because they simply don't want to govern Ukrainians. What they would like is an end to the war. They'd like to have a Ukraine on their border that is neutral and not aligned with NATO. It's very simple. Yeah.
And everyone in NATO continues to resist this idea, except for, obviously, Erdogan, who is technically a NATO, but more important, Hungary, now Slovakia. I expect the Poles will come around to the same conclusion that it's time to end this war. I think Europe is in the middle of a swing to the right. I think we're going to see a new German government at some point in the near future that is to the right of center. I suspect that will happen across Europe because it's a matter of survival for Europe, for reasons internal to Europe. But the war in Ukraine is effectively over. We continue to send money there, keep Ukraine on life support, because people in Washington refuse to admit that this has been a horrible mistake, that our interference in this matter has caused the death of at least 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And how many wounded is anybody's guess. Almost half the population is either out of the country, wounded, dead, or sitting under Russian control right now. So it's a terrible situation. The soon thing will be better for everybody.
But
again, no one wants to admit they made a mistake, and we can't afford it. We're piling up debt at a rate that boggles the mind. No one could even believe the levels of debt that exist in the United States. And I suspect we will continue to do that until we implode financially, which I'm not sure is that far off.
yeah, I know the same thing is in the European Union. There's 600 billion euros being sent to various
war
efforts, mostly Ukraine. And that is all taken up as loans, which has an interest to be paid back. And you and I know who are doing this? The banks and the war industry. They're making money. I heard an interview with one of the executives of Raytheon. He spoke to a person that it was redacted that actually had recorded it. He said, well, we'll increase our profits with $4 billion as long as the Ukraine war persists. And now with the conflict in Israel, we'll add another $5 billion to our profits. There are, of course, people profiting from military conflicts, and that's always been that way. If we go back to the Middle East, that is such a complicated issue. But what do you think? How will this conflict play out? I saw just the day that they're actually going in with ground forces from Israel into Gaza. How do you think it will play out? Is there an end to that? What do you think?
This is the time to strike decisively against Hamas based on the excesses of Hamas's behavior when it attacked Israel on the 7th of October. Right. Obviously, those attacks horrified everyone who witnessed them. No one disputes that. But I think his assumption was, I can now use public sympathy for Israel to justify whatever I want to do against Hamas. And whatever he wants to do has turned out to be Ash's view, this is the time to annihilate Hamas and along with it, whatever population supports it or hides it, and as much of Gaza as possible. He's miscalculated badly because he doesn't understand that this notion of collective punishment that involves the deaths at this point of almost 3,500 children and 6,000 plus civilians is not acceptable anywhere in the world. The other thing is that despite their efforts to suppress media coverage of Gaza in the Arab world or the Muslim world, it's overwhelming. And virtually the entire Islamic world at this point, from Morocco to Indonesia, is horrified and wants to stop this. We are sitting there and we are effectively under control of the Israeli government for all intents and purposes. We've signed on 100%. This is something that Israel's supporters in the United States have cultivated with billions of dollars over many years, to the point where there's virtually no one in the United States government who's willing to stand up and say, there is a limit to what we Americans will tolerate or do. And unfortunately, most Americans really don't understand what's happening over there. They're not terribly interested, and they don't understand the dangers. So, Mr. Netanyahu says, I can leverage American military power to do pretty much whatever I want, and they'll protect my northern flank. That's why you've got to carry your battle groups out there. We've moved B-52S into the region, and his assumption is this additional American naval and air power can be used against his law while he finishes the job in Gaza. There are problems with these assumptions. First of all, this is not the Middle East of 1973, the last time the Israelis fought a really major war in the region. At that point in time, literacy in Egypt was perhaps 40%. The ability to master and employ technology was minimal. The situation in Jordan was a little better, but not much. And of course, Syria failed miserably because it, too, lacked the technical skills and the ability to do a great deal. He's no longer dealing with just his neighbors. Now he has to confront the real possibility that Turkey could actually attack Israel.
I think
Israelis have not taken that seriously. I think numbers of Israelis regard Mr. Erdogan, as frankly, many in Washington, as a blowhard. I think that's a very serious mistake. I think that Mr. Erdogan may be many things, and certainly a very clever political figure who knows how to navigate the tough waters of the Middle East and Europe. But he is not a blowhard. And the Turkish armed forces are exceptional. They're tough, they're well-equipped, and the population itself is overwhelmingly in support of action against Israel. To Turkey, you must add, of course, the Iranians. The Iranians can't project much conventional military power very far from their borders, but they have an extraordinary arsenal of missiles. They have a very complicated and complex and effective air and space system that they've built over many years. They've pulled together the best human capital in their excellent engineers, very imaginative and innovative. They pose a real threat to the Israelis. If you look at the range of their weapons, their theater ballistic missiles, which are now very accurate and very lethal, the number in the hundreds can reach out to about 1,200 miles. 1,200 miles more than sufficiently covers Israel. And Israel can turn to its Iron Dome, but any air and missile defense system can be overwhelmed.